I'm going to get right into it. I got a couple notes just for the people in the audience. I'm going to be watching, as you all should know, the Q&A. You can ask questions or topics or things that you'd like Steve to address or clarify, and I'll try to tie it into the conversation. But Steve's not seeing anything. So you can send him kudos and stuff in the chat. He can look at it later. But I'm going to be watching for the Q&A. I'd love to hear what you'd like me to add to our questions. So as a way to get started, I'm not going to go through your whole bio. We'll have it in the show notes. We'll have it, and everybody can see it on your LinkedIn. I think it's a pretty good description. We're going to go all over kind of your current situation and your past and your motivations. But to start us out, how would you describe what you do now and what your business is?
Yeah, for sure. So first, really appreciate you having me on. This is I'm really excited to talk with you and the team today. But yeah, so my day job right now is running CoLo Consulting. So we help tech-enabled startups turn chaos into systems. And we do that through three main services: strategic planning, process optimization, and customer success. Strategic planning, really just helping entrepreneurs define their vision and then put together a game plan to go from point A to point B. Process optimization, I know you're very familiar with this with Pragmatic, but essentially we just help teams become more efficient in their day-to-day, right? So we come in, map out the current state, uncover any pain points, manual processes, things that aren't super efficient, and then help them design and implement a future state process with automations, no-code tech, all that good stuff. And then the final one, customer success, is our newest service and one that I'm really excited about. But we're helping product teams deliver incredible customer experiences. So typically we come in when a team has made a big sale, like an enterprise sale, and help their customers deliver on the value, essentially helping them deliver on their sales promises. So those are the three main things that we do. But put simply, we're just the extra set of hands for growing teams.
So you're currently a consultant, and my understanding is you started out working as a consultant in your past. So I'd love to a little bit of understanding of how you became your own consultant. But also the question I'd like to hear is, when did you start thinking about yourself as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I did start off in management consulting, and I like to say that I'm a recovering management consultant these days. But yeah, so I started working with the big Fortune 500 companies and healthcare, financial services, and I learned a great deal and had some great companies that I worked for. But the shift from doing that to kind of starting my own thing, there's a couple levels to it that I think of. So number one, the shift from what I'm calling, a entrepreneur to like seeing it as a viable path, right? I actually think of a mentor and actually an early client of mine. We went out to Brooklyn to get some beers when I was living in New York, and he was asking me about my future, like, what do you want to do with business? And I kind of naively said, well, I want to create my own thing. And he looked at me and he like looks and says, don't do it. And I take a step back as someone I really respect, and he has his own startup, and I'm just sitting there like, oh man, what's going on? And he sees me do this, and he's like, oh, I'm not saying don't ever do it, but I don't think that's the path you should go immediately. So what he went on to describe was saying, hey, you have this great consulting skill set. I know you want to start your own thing, but just use the skills you already have to do that. So that's when the idea really clicked in my head, and I said, oh, well, this is actually a viable path. I don't have to go raise money. I don't have to, go and do all this other crazy stuff to do a startup. That's when it really clicked for me. And then I think the second level, when it really became real and I maybe identified as an entrepreneur, was when I made my first dollar online. It wasn't much. It was like a kind of a one-off project. But when like the money hit the bank account and I said, well, hey, someone actually wants this. That's when I kind of identified as like, this is what I want to do. And there wasn't really any turning back from there.
So you have a degree, you went to school, you went in as a management consultant. I'm curious about when you decided to go solo. I have to assume there was a lot of the basic nuts and bolts of like incorporating or setting up your first, like the very first nuts and bolts. Was there a learning curve? A lot of people assume like a business degree or like the management consultant, startup consultant prepares you for the starting of something. But I always find it has some gaps. Any nuts and bolts there that was a learning curve?
Yeah, I mean, everything was a learning curve. I didn't know anything. I don't know much even today. But honestly, I didn't do any of that to start. So like you said, I had a business background. I'd worked with a bunch of companies, but I didn't start an LLC. I didn't incorporate. I didn't have a website. I really took it as bare bones as possible. I from the conversation I had with Neil, my mentor, I just put together a one-page Google Doc of like, these are the things that I know how to do. And then I created an Upwork profile saying, "Hey, I'm Steve. Like, these are the things I do. Anybody want to hire me?" So I did all of that before my LLC. I did all of that before creating a website, and that's typically what I recommend to people. I think when people start going down the path, they get pretty scared of like all the things you have to do. Right? Oh, I have to figure out my messaging. I have to figure out what a website looks like. And I'm like, hey, my challenge to you is like find a way to make $1 online, because if you can do that, you can figure out all the rest after that, you know.
Or people get distracted. I know some people who got like 35 hours into name and logo before they actually knew what they were going to sell.
Exactly.
For sure.
Yep. Right.
Did your company name come after or before actually selling?
So the company name is a little interesting. So CoLo is actually short for co-located. So it's kind of a technical term of, you know, data centers and all of that. But I think it sounded good as like, oh, CoLo sounds good. But it was actually started as a delivery service, which sounds funny. But the original idea from CoLo was to deliver fresh breakfast to people getting on trains out of New York City. Like, for real, that was the first idea. That's where CoLo came from. And then yeah, I morphed it a little bit into the current iteration, but the name stuck. I thought it sounded good, 2-syllable, kind of checked all the boxes.
Did you say it just morphed a little bit from grocery delivery to management consulting?
Slightly. I mean, it turns out the police in New York City subways don't really like people delivering packages to other folks getting on trains. So, you know, it morphed a little bit, yeah.
So not everybody might know this, but you're from away from, like most of us in the audience right now are in East Coast Canada, but you started out in New York, you mentioned. One of the things I know about you, but I don't know many details, is that even before COVID, you were what I would call the digital nomad lifestyle. You were able to work from anywhere, essentially. And I'd be very curious about, first of all, how did you do that? Like how did you make the decision, and what are the ways you did that to leave the States and to work from elsewhere? I'm going to follow it up with a little bit of like pros and cons of realities of it, but maybe just start out with how you started that journey.
Yeah, for sure. So that was something that I, from the beginning, wanted to do. I wanted to create something that allowed me to work from anywhere, which, you know, in today's times, that seems pretty normal, and everyone's doing that. But back in 2017, 2018, when I started, maybe not as normal, especially for consulting companies. So it actually came. The story is a little funny, but I was at the end of a 2-week vacation during my 9 to 5. I went off to Thailand, and I was with a university friend, and it was the last day of the vacation, and we were sitting on a beach, you know, getting ready to go, and I was kind of writing in a journal, thinking about, you know, the experience, the trip, and kind of how I felt rejuvenated, and like, you know, travel is super important to me. And I thought back, I was like, you know, why am I going back? Why, like, I want to continue doing this. And I actually wrote down, I still have it to this day in the journal, saying like, you will find a way to do this full time and have this option available to you. So that was when I kind of set the intention. I had no idea what that looked like. I was like, oh, I'll do this delivery service, and I'll make $1 million, and then I'll be able to get from there. But so that's when I set the intention. And a quote that I think back to a lot is, you know, we all have 2 lives, and the second one begins when you realize you only have one. So I think it was Confucius or someone said that. But essentially, that was when I said, hey, I only have this one shot. I'm in my 20s. Like, let's give it a shot and kind of go from there. But that's when it started. But I'm happy to go into kind of the practical steps, because from that point to when I started the actual company was about 2.5 years. So a lot of practical stuff had happened.
So I guess for me, just on the practical steps of starting it up, is my understanding of consulting. I did an 18-month stint. I'm a recovering consultant as well. Is you do a lot of client site visits. It's become less now because of COVID, but I was actually at one point, I had to have a serious conversation with my wife because I looked ahead 3 months of the calendar and I was averaging 22 days a month on the road. And I hadn't even seen it coming, much less prepared the other people in my life around it. So I have to think like consulting with entrepreneurs and companies seems to me like a difficult thing to separate your physical presence. So how did you manage that?
Yeah, it's interesting, like because I did the same thing that you did, right? So when I was in the management consulting realm, I was flying off every Monday morning. I would come back, Thursday after a full week on client site. And the premise behind CoLo was to be able to replace that model with a uh, not in-person model, right? So doing all remote. Now, honestly, the challenge was getting people around to that that idea. I mean, obviously now it's a lot different, but when we started, it was like, hey, like we're not going to travel to you, and we did the benefits, right? We're like, well, you don't have to spend money on travel. We're going to be able to do things faster, like all these benefits. But people were really hesitant and reticent to accept that because they're like, well, how will you really know our business if you're not here? So that was something that was really hard, and trying to make that sell was difficult. But I think over time it got easier when we started proving results and seeing the value come out of it, and was a differentiator for us early on. And now that we have 2 years of experience doing that, we've actually seen clients come in and say, hey, I'm interested in what you're doing because you've been doing this for a long time, rather than consulting companies that are trying to adapt to this model, which I know you guys deal with a lot as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about the realities. I have to imagine, because I've thought about it myself. I've read the books. I've looked at the processes.
Yeah.
I imagine like the laptop on a French bistro table next to a beach, and everything's in perfect harmony. I've done a lot of traveling. You and I share that passion and interest. I'd love to hear some of the pros and cons of the reality of traveling while or working while traveling.
Yeah, so I think the biggest like myth buster for me is like you see the guy on a beach with a laptop, and like that just doesn't happen, right? So I mean, you can do it, but it doesn't work out very well. So I think it's kind of disassociating the idea, or what popular culture describes a digital nomad, because the reality is, honestly, is trying to find Wi-Fi within 5 minutes of a call, and then something goes wrong, the power goes out in the city that I'm in, and you're just scrambling, right? So like that sometimes is the day to day. But I mean, I think the pros is kind of what people expect it to be. You have complete freedom of where you want to be. For me, that looks like being able to constantly be inspired by new ideas. You don't speak a language typically, and I know you know this as well, and you're trying to like just find your way through life. And I relate that a lot to entrepreneurship, right? Like you don't really know what you're doing. I still don't know what I'm doing. I'm making up as I go, and I find a lot of parallels with travel on that. So for me, it was being able to say, I'm going to try and live somewhere for a little while, try to integrate with the culture, really identify with living somewhere. And then once I'm ready, I move on to a new place and start the whole process again. But in terms of cons, it's difficult. I mean, time zones are really tough. Wi-Fi is really hard. And yeah, just things that you take for granted when you have like a home office, or like even a second monitor, is something that you have to adjust very quickly your expectations for when you're working on the road.
For sure. So I don't know if you knew this, but I've lived in a few different countries, and in my previous career as a chef, that was a big part of like the future that I wanted to do, was the world citizen. And one thing that I came home with, or came home back to kind of a home base, is how important I find my own tribe and community, and it's starting to collect those people that I can connect with long term versus a lot of short term acquaintances. And I don't think it necessarily has to be in one region. Like it doesn't have to be where I grew up and everybody, but I started investing a lot into what is my community, what are the people I'm going to remain contacted with. And so I look at it from that point of view, having gone through that similar experience. I was wondering what your revelations have been around like community and home, because when you move and see new cultures all the time, it does create some new perspectives.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that I think I'm still trying to figure out. Like you said, especially when you're, a digital nomad, or you're moving what home is to you every 3 to 6 months. There's a tendency to have those kind of short-term connections, or maybe not invest in a place, or not have the place invest in you, honestly, because you're only there for a short amount of time. So I think something that I struggle with continually is like how to balance those two things, right? The need for, or the want to continue to explore new places, with trying to find the tribe and invest in long-term, friendships and relationships with a place or people there. So I haven't figured that out yet, and it's something that is probably a con for the digital nomad lifestyle. But to your earlier point, I think finding community is something that I didn't do very well in the beginning. I think I tried to go it alone for a long time, and as you know as well, entrepreneurship can be really lonely, right? Like, you're doing this weird thing, and as much as I love my family and friends, it's hard for them to really understand what it's like, and like the imposter syndrome, and how you could be very scared all the time about this going away tomorrow. So I think if you're able to find a community of people that that understand that weird situation that we're in. I just read The Art of Community by Charles Vogel, and he talks about when you find a community and you're starting to talk through your problems, or your things that you're challenged by, the group of people, if you're in the right community, you don't really have to explain it that much, right? It's like, yeah, we get it. Like, oh, you lost that big sale. I know how that feels. Or you made this hiring mistake. Like, I get that. So if you're able to find that, it just, for me personally, it helps you just get through the day, and honestly, you give a lot less emotional baggage to the people around you that are supporting you in a lot of other ways as well. But I know you have great experiences with your peer group as well, right?
Yeah, I remember so I have a business peer group, but I that was the first time I had an entrepreneur level discussion of shared experience, and I didn't realize how important it would be. But I remember the time where I said I quintupled in sales in a 6-month period, and everybody outside, you say that, I was like, oh wow. And then I suddenly found this group of people when I said that, I'm like, ooh, are you okay? So
Right.
yeah, people just get it, they understand it. I think that's really important. So you are currently essentially locked, COVID bound in Canada, in rural Canada, not even in one of the bustling metropolises of which we have so many.
Yeah, right.
Sarcasm intended. So maybe just give me an idea of how you're still not like in home. You're still essentially traveling and living in different places, but you've been in the same place for a long period of time. I'd love, just as a tail end of our conversations about you building community as a digital nomad, what has been the surprises or unexpected or expected benefits or challenges of being in one location that's not where you grew up?
For sure. I think, I've been lucky to be in a community here that has kind of like opened its arms to me. And I think that's really reflective of Atlantic Canada as a whole, and the values you guys have here. So I've been really lucky. But I think the big differences for me was establishing rituals and kind of, a new routine. It's kind of funny, but I put together a home gym in the basement here, and like, that's something that would never occur to me on the road, right? So I think it's been nice in that sense to kind of have a routine and kind of know where you're going to be, know where the Wi-Fi is, and all of that. So I've taken solace in the fact that I have time to do things that I wouldn't be able to do on the road. But I'd be lying to say I wouldn't. I like, don't miss traveling, and I don't miss the newness, and I don't miss having new experiences. But I've been really lucky to be in a very supportive community, and I've met a lot of new people, like yourself. It's been a new connection, and I think it's just trying to figure out what the place has to offer for you, and what you can offer the place as well.
Yeah, great. I have a couple questions coming in that I think are relevant right now. One of them is, and I haven't figured this out, but I remember when I travel and work, how do you balance your work and your personal and your travel time when you can choose to do anything anytime?
Yeah.
Any best practices you've just figured out on that one?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, Levi, as well. It's like when you have full autonomy in your day, you can really choose to do whatever you want, which is a blessing and a curse, right? So every day you can wake up and say, well, I'm going to do these 2 things or these 3 things, and kind of go off your own way if you want to. But for me, it's funny because people will think like, well, you have all this time, but I actually become more structured during my entrepreneur journey than I did before. And the reason being is that because you have all these opportunities and you want to go see this new cafe or you want to go see this really cool site, the only way that I can do that is if I schedule out, okay, these are the 3 hours I'm going to work. Here are the 3 most important things I'm going to do today. And once I get those 3 things done, I have the rest of the day to do whatever I want, right? So that's the way that I've approached it. I also do like very practical things in terms of like, I have a standing weekly review of myself, and there's not anyone else. It's just me looking at my screen, looking what I did the past week, setting up the next week, and like really scheduling things out. But I find that's the way that I try to balance, but it's really hard. I mean, especially when you're in a new place.
So I can feel other people listening to this and saying, oh, so you just need lots of discipline and accountability. So I'm guessing you had to learn that. I'm wondering if there was any like first steps or things that you experienced or resources you went to that help you figure out the structure that you built.
Yeah, so I think the main books that started being a kind of that productivity kind of jolt, which I'll be honest is a double-edged sword a little bit, like being too productivity focused and saying, oh, well, I'm going to do this today, this is going to do this result. But Getting Things Done by David Allen is the Bible in that sense, and it's really helped me kind of figure that all out. And then looking at tools that kind of make things a little bit easier, like we're both Notion fans, so I use Notion a lot. I'm able to duplicate things, yeah. But Getting Things Done is the what started me on the path for sure.
Oh, great. I love a good recommendation. The library, I'll never be able to read all the books on my list, but it's always good to know which the next ones are. So some of the questions I do like to ask everybody, because I love the commonalities and the differences. One is, in the time that you have charted your own path, been on your own, what has been the most exciting moment? Aside from making your first dollar, we've already covered that one. If you think about it, what has been the most exciting moment for you as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, like you said, the first dollar in the bank account is pretty mind blowing. But I think more than that, what I get most excited about is when my clients have huge wins, right? So you know this as well as I do. We only exist because of our clients' results, right? Like without them, we'd be nothing. So the most exciting moments for me personally was seeing a couple clients have like big funding rounds or like big sales that they've made. And not that just we maybe played a small part in that, but just to see them succeed and see kind of the value they're getting out of this entrepreneurial journey themselves, like that's what gets me most excited, and that's what I try to help people towards their goals.
So the complimentary question, which I know you know is coming because I ask it often, you've heard some of our conversations, is and one of the reasons why I do this conversation series is I really don't believe that any entrepreneur has it all together, and everybody makes lots of mistakes, and I'm trying to take the business owner and the entrepreneur off the pedestal. So if I was to ask you, looking back in your last few years, cringeworthy, I can't believe I did that mistakes, I'd love to have discuss anything that comes to mind that you're open to sharing.
Yeah, so there's tons of mistakes, right? Tons of challenges. The one that I think of most often is, honestly, I kept it under wraps what I was doing when I started. I didn't tell many people in the beginning. I tried to build everything in a silo. Like I tried to just brute force my way into entrepreneurship. And I think that was just because I was scared, quite honestly. I was scared it wasn't going to work. I was scared that I would have to kind of crawl back to the corporate world with my tail between my legs and say like, hey, please, someone give me a job. So I really just tried to, I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Like I didn't tell my network. I think a lot of my friends and family thought Steve was just going to Asia for a while and kind of had his quarter life crisis.
Finding himself.
Yeah, which I mean, I guess I was doing too, but I think just not telling people and keeping things under wrap was if I was to do it again, I would tell people from the beginning. And then on top of that, finding the community early on, I think I delayed myself in terms of doing that. And but yeah, I think just telling people early and being more confident in that sense would be helpful.
So what I wonder, and maybe hindsight's a powerful thing, do you think there's anything somebody could have told you at the outset that would have changed that direction? Or do you think that's something you would have had to go through?
Yeah. So I mean, I think you have to go through. If it wasn't going to be that mistake, I would have been 10 other mistakes, right? So there's no protecting yourself from mistakes. You have to just go out and do it. But I think actually one of my role models, a guy by the name of Joe Meyer, he continually says that in your 20s, short of getting arrested, there's not many things that you can do that you can't recover from, right? So he said, if you're going to take risks, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, this is the perfect time. So I think hearing that later, and that was a couple of weeks ago he said that, but hearing that, just being comfortable with, hey, this might not work, and that's fine, right? Like, you're going to build a certain skill set. I think people are going to resonate with the fact that you tried it in the beginning. So like, go all in, I mean, I don't say that in like a financial sense. I think there's a lot of things you can do to take a lot of risks off the table. We can jump into that, but I think just hearing that and from people that have done it before would be super helpful.
Yeah. One thing we had a speaker say, and it resonates, and I've been thinking about it often, is like, people will hopefully start to see entrepreneurship more as a career option. Not only like the high school kids, the university kids, but the parents seeing it as a viable career option. Because right now, when you say, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, you think about, being an actor or being a star athlete. And the equivalent is really not. Like, it's a real, honest, viable career option that has less risk than many other educated professions. So I do like the idea of like changing our thought pattern around it. So I have a lot of great questions. So I'm going to be a little less selfish, and I'm going to let some of the audience get some more information out of you. So these are not in any particular order. And I love the questions, so we're going to go for them. So since you first started your own business, what new belief or behavior or habit has most improved your life?
That's a good question. I think habit was some of it we touched on before, so time management for sure. I think belief changes. I think I had a certain perception of business across the world. I think we've been at CoLo really, really blessed to be able to work with 25 clients across 5 different continents. So I think belief-wise, I remember the first client I ever had from Asia. We put together a presentation for them, put together like messaging, and they said after reading it, they're like, "This isn't going to work." And I was taken aback. Again, it's my first client, so I'm pretty scared at this point. And through a conversation, when I learned that the culture and the things that resonated there, I kind of brute forced the American ruthlessness of economics into the message. Whereas I found that people work in very different ways. I mean, look, even New York and Atlantic Canada, huge differences, right? So that times 1,000 different places you can work. Those beliefs and just the worldview shift was completely different for me.
So this is just an idea I've been talking about in smaller circles for a long time, but I'm just going to put it out there in case it comes out and in a year from now we want to like actually make it happen. Move away from entrepreneur to really making something happen. In all my travels and entrepreneur and community activities, I would love to be able to go to a different country community and go sit down in their peer group or go see their businesses and talk to them about their customers and their customs. And I manage a lot of behind the scenes tours of businesses that are throughout Atlantic Canada. And I just think that is the vacation I want to take. I just think that would be a really wild, interesting way to get under the hood of, whether it's Asia, whether it's Germany, so let's ping that, maybe we'll come back to that. We'll tie in food and travel and, well, we have the ability to do whatever we want. We just got to find all the time.
That's right. I love it.
So here's a few more. What do you think is the single most worthwhile investment you've ever made? Not necessarily just of money, but could be of your time or your energy.
These are good questions. I think it's the Kindle. I hate to bring it to a materialistic sense, but for me, books.
Mine's normally right here, but it's upstairs.
Mine's around here somewhere too. But honestly, like books are everything to me. I'm a late adopter, to be completely honest. I didn't read much in university or growing up, but Kindle, I mean, especially for a digital nomad, having that on the road, access to a million books. But I think that has made a huge difference in just reducing the friction to read. You said you have this huge library you're trying to get through. I do too, but it's digital, so it's a little bit easier. So it's not mocking me every time I go into a room. But I think the hack there is that I talk about sometimes is that you can pair a Kindle with a local library subscription. So you can get free ebooks delivered to your Kindle anywhere in the world with a local library subscription for $0. So like, I just think there's easy ways to reduce the friction of reading more, and the Kindle plus the library subscription is the one for me.
Oh, great. That's a good transferable recommendation. Love it. Yeah. So this is just some local color, but I think I'd love to get your insights on it. What are uniquely New Brunswick or Maritimes cultural things that have stood out for you? Anything especially random or odd, or things that you really enjoy that especially that surprise you or that you didn't expect?
Yeah. I mean, on a very superficial level, I love fiddleheads.
Which people can Google those if they're not familiar.
I was going to say, people probably don't know that if they're not, haven't been in this region too much. I love them. But I think the most, I wouldn't call it surprising, but thing that struck me the most is it's just like how nice people are here. I know Canadians have the stereotype of being super nice, but until you're here and you're kind of living here, and maybe have some experience living in some other, maybe not some nice places. Yeah, the story I tell is that I had a car breakdown on a very rural road, like you said. We're living in a very rural place right now, and a car broke down, and I was thinking, oh well, probably have to call someone or figure out a way to get back to civilization. And the idea was like, no, someone will stop. Like someone will definitely stop. Like the next person that comes by, they will stop. And I was thinking back in my New York days, I was like, people will probably just drive by. It's COVID, right? Like, no, people don't want to stop and like, I don't know who I am, all this stuff. And sure enough, the next person stopped. Like, hey, what's going on? Do you need help? Like, should I call someone? I got my brother down the road. They'll bring the tractor. And then the next person stopped. The next person stopped. So it's a small, silly example, but I mean that's reflective of the culture here, and that's something that you don't find everywhere.
Yeah, for sure. So changing tact a little bit. A lot of people. So I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and we talk about what is success. And I don't believe success is big sales, big money, big profit. I believe success is in attaining what you want to achieve. So it's important to understand what success looks like. I'd love to know from your point of view, what does success look like?
Yeah, it's a great question, Levi, and something that I think about a lot. For me personally, I think entrepreneurship is somewhat of a game, and I don't mean to write it off as something that's it doesn't have real consequences, but for me, having the ability to continue playing the game is what success looks like for me. So to be very honest, I'm kind of living my dream life right now, right? I have full autonomy of where I work, who I work with, all these great things. And if I'm able to continue playing that game, that's success for me. And able to continue to help people, able to keep exploring my curiosities. I don't really see it as, well, if I hit this MRR, ARR, like I'll be successful. It's more just like, hey, can I continue doing this? If yes, then that's all I need right now. And the curiosity thing is huge for me.
Yeah, I love new problems to solve, new learnings all the time.
Absolutely.
So the other, I heard, and I think it was in conversation with you earlier, that you actually trialed a mini retirement earlier this year. And I've always wanted to do that. I'm a big believer in that. The idea of, as an entrepreneur, you could always be working on the next sale, and you could always be doing more. There is no end to the things you could be doing. The discipline to just say, no, I'm going to take a break from taking on more. I'm wondering how you decided to do that, and then how did it actually go?
Yeah, for sure. So in January this year, I had a couple client closeout contracts at the end of December 2020, and instead of trying to find the new client, I took a step back and said, I'm not going to take any new clients right now. I have a few ideas that I want to explore, but really just taking a step back and trying to reevaluate. So it's tough. I know you know this too. Your mind doesn't really stop working. You can say, "Oh, I'm not gonna take any clients," but it doesn't mean that your mind shuts off. And actually, I was reading more than I ever had in my life, I think. So like all these new ideas started coming. But it's something that I've tried to do quite regularly, just to take a step back, understand kind of what my current situation is. Do my old goals still apply? Right? Do I still, am I still going down the path that I want to go down? And just being able to take that reset is super important for me. And I know I'm in a privileged situation. Not everyone has the company one or the situation to do that. But I think if you can, it's a great way to chart out your next chapter.
So when we first talked about this, you actually mentioned that you come up with all new business ideas. Of course, we always do whenever we have time free. So I'm curious about, you've come up with an idea. I believe you're moving forward with an idea in addition to what you're doing. The part I'd really like to learn. So I now have had a couple businesses, and I did some consulting, and I was surprised at the difference, but also existing challenges of starting a new business, even though you technically know so much more than you did the first time. So I'm curious about, the new project. What has been surprising for you? What has been the new learnings? And also tell us what the new idea is.
Sure. So I'll preface the idea first, and then maybe I'll go into kind of what looks a little bit different and what you still have challenges with, no matter what you're doing. So the idea is, I'm calling it Lead Beacon, but essentially it was a scratch your own itch situation. So COVID hit 2020. Like many people, half my clients either paused or ended their contracts. So I kind of panicked, right? So what I accidentally did was built a product that alerted me for new job openings for positions that our service could replace, right? So for us, it was customer success managers for health tech firms. So I kind of hacked this thing together. I wouldn't even call it a product. It was like a Google sheet on steroids, right? And it basically said, hey, like this person, it also tied in the actual decision maker's name and email and all this stuff. So it was just something that I created for myself. Obviously COVID kind of rebounded and people got more comfortable, and it really worked. And people actually responding, which is kind of crazy to me. And then I kind of got booked up, and I was like, okay, well, I'll put that aside. I don't need to do it anymore. And then at the end of 2020, I was like, wait a second, maybe other people could use this as well. So that's when I, at the early part of this year, started putting the process in place to actually test it on other people and see if this would be valuable. So that's the idea in a nutshell. It takes your service, it looks for open job openings, and then it gives you the decision maker's email and name for you to reach out and do sales, right? But what was different than the first one? I think the positive difference is I've learned to ship faster, right? So even creating the first website for CoLo, it like took me 2 months, 3 months. I had to learn all these technologies, right? It's just a no-code website builder, but I had to figure out, okay, like how do you do messaging? How do you test these things? So in that sense, I was able to spin up a website and start testing within a week now, which is a market improvement from my last one. But I think the challenge is still there, right? So there's no way to, in my view, to validate an idea truly until you get out of the building and start talking to people, right? Saying, hey, do you want this? Like, I know you think it's a great idea, but will you put a credit card down and buy it, right? So I think those challenges are already going to be present for any new company or new idea. But trying to get to a no faster, or trying to invalidate assumptions faster, is kind of what the approach I'm taking right now is.
Yeah, that's very validating. I find very similar in our experience. When we started up, the first business since I had a business closure, some things were still a challenge in learning, but like the name selection, the website, the setting up an email, the things that took months were I think it was 6 hours. Like, let's get that stuff. It's not as important as getting the first test out there. So very, very validating from my point of view. I have a really great question that I'd love to explore coming in from the audience. And I have no ego in this. When questions are so much better in the audience, then I can just ignore the ones I did. It's great. And I have some personal experience with this, but you have already you're relatively young. You have mentioned you're living your best life in a lot of ways, and a lot of other people's definition. The question is, every entrepreneur experiences at some point a trough of sorrow. which is very true. And we mentioned it was lonely. It goes through, there's a roller coaster for sure. Do you feel that you've gone through that yet? And if so, are there any key motives or any things that helped you pull yourself out of it? Especially when externally you probably have had a lot of visual success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know if I've definitely gone through the worst one yet, but I definitely have gone through some. I think too, it's interesting because you can go on Instagram or you can post some photos of me living in Vietnam or going on like a month-long motorbike trip through Vietnam. You're like, wow, Steve is super happy all the time, and yeah, it looks like there's no challenges. So that's a facade, obviously, right? We all know that is not real life. So for me, I mean, I think it was early on where the sorrow came in. I talked about getting that first sale online, and I actually hit the first 3 projects I applied for. So I was like, oh, well, I'm a world beater. Like it's going to be easy. And then I sold everything I had in New York City. I put my backpack on, my laptop, one thing, and I flew off to Asia, and I was like, all right, it's time to conquer the world, Steve. And then no one bought anything for like 3 months, right? So I was like applying, I was doing the same thing. Like nothing changed. Like I didn't say I was in Asia now, or I didn't say that this is my full-time gig, but like crickets for 3 months. So I just sat there. I was like, I made a huge mistake. Like, this is not going to work out well. So I think that was the big thing. But I mean, to get out of that, it was really just consistency, trying new things. I just read a book called Peak by Erickson and Poole, who talks about everyone hits a certain plateau, right? In any type of skill building. And I think entrepreneurship is a skill that can be built. It's not something you're born with. So if you hit a plateau, like I clearly did very early on, how do you take a step back and try a different approach, right? And I think that's what the entrepreneur muscle is just building the ability to try new things, see what works, discard things that don't. And I think that's really the only way to get through things like that. So I'm sure I had a lot of other challenges, and I'm sure there's another Trumpet Sparrow coming soon, but that was the first big one.
So let's just go back a few minutes or a minute or so, and that 3 months, crickets.
Yeah.
Who were you talking to at that time?
In terms of community, or in terms of like?
I mean, actually, like I'm picturing 3 months traveling, and you have these concerns. Was there anybody you could actually talk to at that time?
Yeah. So
about the concerns that you were having.
Yeah. So there was a few people. I think I had a close group of like mentors and people that were close to me. It's hard to really relate to hey, I'm in this new country now, and the exact situation probably was very lonely, and that's kind of why I said create a community. Like even in the digital nomad hotspots that I was in, there were people there, right? I just don't think I leveraged like the opportunity as much as I could have. I still felt like a fake entrepreneur, honestly. Like especially when no sales were coming in, I was like, what am I going to talk about with these people? Like, oh yeah, I'm starting this thing, but it's not making any money. Like, so I think there were definitely people around. I think the mistake I made was not tapping into them earlier. So yeah, it was tough.
So another great question coming in from the audience. So I really like the definition of success. We had that question. So the question coming in is, for you, what does failure look like? What does it look like to be unable to play the game, as you put it? Any thoughts on what that would mean for you? What does failure look like for you?
Yeah, it's funny because I think my definition of failure has changed a lot over the years. So if you asked me 3 years ago what failure looks like, it would be going back to or I mean honestly it would be like going broke and not being able to stay and having to rely on others. But right now failure for me is, it's almost self-defining now. So failure for me would be not living up to kind of what I have in mind for potential, right? Or not really diving into my curiosities and letting kind of outside forces force my hand in a way. I think, in a tactical sense, that means taking on clients that you're not super jived to work with, right? Or don't have the same values as your company or just you personally. So I think if I'm in a position where I have to do that, or I don't have the choice, that doesn't feel right to me. But I mean, generally now, it's funny because I played baseball in university, and to be a good baseball player, you hit the ball 3 out of 10 times, right? And that's considered super successful. So you're failing 7 times out of 10. And for me, I learned so much more through quote unquote failures than I do from any successes, right? And I know you probably have the same mentality. So not that anyone ever goes out looking for failure, but the perception of like, oh, I didn't make that sale. Wow, I think my business sucks now is very different than, hey, I didn't make that sale. What was off in my presentation? What didn't seem to resonate, or what maybe that was the wrong client to reach out to. So like it's shifted from failing and taking that a reflection upon myself versus failing and being able to learn from it and have the opportunity to try again later.
So I agree with all of that, and I have a weird segue here. So my personal definition of failure is all surrounded around, because in all the businesses I've worked with, except for the 18 months I did as a consultant, is around building a team, a larger organization structure around. And my definition of failure surrounds the impact on that team and the customers. And we have customers now that if we stopped, like there will be significant challenges to those customers. So with that being so that's where my headspace went, and why my segue, which now is hopefully less weird, is I'm curious, because right now you're essentially selling yourself and your time. And I know you have some supports and you have collaborators and co-contractors. I'm curious about what your position is on the benefits and challenges of being a solopreneur, and if you have any views on what you'd like in the future. What's the future look like for you?
Yeah, I think it's something that it's interesting to dive into between kind of you and I as well, because you've definitely taken the team approach and building it out, and there's tons of benefits to doing that. I think that I've taken a different approach and start small, stay small for at least my consulting business. And the book I think of for that is The Company of One by Paul Jarvis. I'm not sure if you've read it, but that for me kind of said, well, I don't want to be responsible for someone else's livelihood, and maybe they buy a house. And initially that was a little bit scary for me, right? So I was like, I don't even know if this is going to work yet. I can't involve someone else in this, right? That's terrifying. But so that was kind of like the initial fear that set in. But I think it's kind of morphed into something that I don't really want to scale the consulting business to a certain team member growth or really build it as a productized service. I think the way that I view it, and this actually came from Neil, my early mentor, the one I had beers with in Brooklyn, he said, use your consulting business as like a faucet, right? If you think about it, like, yes, you only get paid for the time that you put in and then the certain skills you have, but that's a great way to fund your other ideas, right? So the way that I view it is I don't really want to scale up the consulting business and try and sell it or, make a certain profit margin on it. I just want to use it as a way to maybe fund other product ideas that I have or other experiments that would be more scalable in that sense. But I mean, in terms of cons, it's really hard to operate without a team. I think that I feel like an extension of my client's team. So I feel like I have teams out there. But when you don't have someone that knows like kind of everything that you're doing, and that can get lonely as well. So I think there's definitely pros and cons, and it's just about figuring out what business you want and then kind of creating the organization within that worldview.
Yeah, I think that's really good self-awareness, that understanding of your definition of success, I think would have a lot of like, this isn't my only vehicle. This is a path towards creating those other vehicles, for sure. That's, yeah, it's something I think about often, just because, I have chosen to take the team approach and to build that organization. I think that everybody should use their superpowers, and I'm not an expert and perfect at it, but I enjoy, and I think I'm okay at building teams and organizations and at creating meaningful, worthwhile jobs. I think that I'm hoping more people do that. Sure. One of the other things that you and I have in common, I'm sure it's obvious from the last 45 minutes or so, is that we're both reading, but more than reading, we're both really interested in the continuous self-improvement and change of perspective, and it's similar to world travel, similar to other things, and similar to being an entrepreneur. It's not something you can talk about quite as freely with people who don't share the same interest, but we are in a safe space. So as we come to the end of our conversation, I would love to, and you've mentioned some great resources and books and mentors. What are the most recommended, like either podcasts or books that you'd suggest that are maybe other than what you've already mentioned? Like, what are the key at the core to date for you?
Yeah. So, Levi, we could go all day with this. I think we could fill up 2 or 3 podcasts with this, but I'll try to do I spend a lot of time thinking about this, and I know you do as well.
Yeah. So, the good saying is strategy is about what limiting.
Exactly. Right. It's the constraints for sure.
You can't have 10 top priorities.
That's right. So I'll try to segment my favorites into various sections based on people what they're interested in. So entrepreneurship, I think E-Myth Revisited by Gerber, required reading. Built to Sell by Werlo, 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, The Mom Test, and Lean Startup. Those are like my go-tos for anyone that wants to start a business, right? I think for client services, Getting Naked by Lencioni. I know we share this one. I think I don't know why. I love the business fables. Like, it kind of seems silly when I'm reading it, but it's like, it's awesome.
And your first 2 are actually 2 that all of our team are suggested to read as they get hired. The E-Myth, Built to Sell are like the first 2. So it's really funny how aligned our lists are.
Yeah. It's I think Getting Naked is great for anyone that's a consultant or like, any kind of client services. I think $1 Million Consulting by Alan Weiss. I hate the title, but it's actually the proposal template that I use. So he does a great job of putting it like a 1-2 page proposal template that I recommend to everyone that needs a quick and dirty way to get proposal out the door. I might have lost you for a second. Nope. Am I back?
You're back now. You're back.
Well, the last couple books that I'll recommend is The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. Naval, his ideas, nothing shaped my mental models more over the last 6 years than Naval's ideas. I recommend it to everyone I talk to now over the last year. And then Mindset by Carol Dweck is a fantastic book as well. Being able to have that growth mindset is great. So those are the main books I recommend. Again, we could go all day, but I'm also happy to talk about podcasts. I have a few recommendations on those as well.
So I am going to probably bring us. I think this will be a neat one to have a 2.0.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good place. We don't want to have because we can just sometimes you can go too long. I completely understand. I have one other question to the audience that I think is a good way to end it for the day. Is based on your starting a new company right now, and as a consultant and helping a lot of entrepreneurs, especially starting out or with significant challenges. Do you have any recommendations for anyone who wants to start a business and doesn't know how to get started? What would you recommend to somebody who's at that very beginning ideation stage?
Yeah. So other than just trying to make $1 online, I think that's my blanket recommendation, but I know that's a little terse, right? I think that doing it as small as possible, taking the smallest step possible. And for most people, that's putting together a Google Doc of your idea, right? So if you're really at stage 0 and no idea what you want to do, put together a Google Doc, put together, here's the possible things that I could do, and here are potential ways to test it. Lean Startup is great for this. The Mom Test is perfect books to read if you're looking for something to jumpstart your inspiration. But really just starting as small as possible to say, here are the things that I can do well. Here are ways that I can test whether anyone wants these things. And keeping it very risk-free at the beginning. I think those are the easiest ways to get started.
Yeah, I'm blanking on the name, but I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the idea that I got was that there is no such thing as a good idea. Yep. Guaranteed, no matter how good your idea is, it will not be the idea that it is a year from now if you implement it. It's always going to change. So it's important to get started. So that's great. Is there anywhere that you really wanted to take this conversation that I didn't allow? Any final messages for the rest of the audience?
No, I mean, obviously, first, I want to really thank you and Pragmatic. What you guys are doing, not only with the work, but this speaker series is super important, right? I know I've had the opportunity to listen to a lot of them as well, but just demystifying entrepreneurship is just so important. I think we're both on the same page. This is what we want to do in general to help other people. So just want to say thank you for having me on and having me share my story here. The only other thing I'd say is that I love to connect with other people that maybe are earlier in their journey, and be a resource if I can help someone. So, I just want to say I'm wide open. Like, contact me. The best place to probably find me is steve-anderson.co. That's my personal website. I have my Twitter there, my email. 100%. If anyone's in the early part of their story, or late part, doesn't matter. Anyone who's doing entrepreneurship in general, reach out to me. I'd love to connect and help if I can.
And we'll make sure that anybody listening to this can access the links. We'll make sure that they're all there so somebody can find easily. So thank you very much. We are going to close this. We'll come back down at the floor, and I encourage people to stick around if they have time, and they can talk to Steve and the rest of the team directly. And I look forward to our next conversation.